Well, welcome back to the Field and Faith podcast. Join with me as always is Mr. Luke D.
What's up, y'all?
And we have got, again, on our second part series with Mr. Zach. And once again, we're going to talk about addictions. And what we're going to talk about is just like kind of an overarching thing, almost umbrella this subject. And then when we have other guests on, we're going to go into it. So last week we talked about pornography, lust, and addictions that kind of go on to it. But we're just going to kind of overarch it because we just thought and felt that there was so much more to kind of tackle. We left some stuff on the table without making these 2-hour-long podcasts, keeping them short, keeping them simple, but umbrelling this idea of addictions because Luke has had a lot more than anyone else I know, and so he can talk as an expert in the field.
Wow, Chris, thank you for just relaying that to the world. Gosh, man, that's a great opener. Yes,
Zach is laughing really good over here, and he doesn't have the mic in front of him right now, so it's great.
Worst episode ever, yeah. So, yes, I have dealt with a lot of addiction in my life. I think one thing, it's safe. I was talking to my brother-in-law this weekend about just kind of some of these things, and I think, right, some people have addictive personalities, and they are just more prone to being addicts for certain things. Where other people aren't. Some people just don't understand, like, how can you become an addict? Well, I think for myself, it started very early on because I enjoyed alcohol and the feeling and the parties and everything that came along with it. And that's kind of where all my stuff started from. But then it turned into, later in high school and the depression and anxiety and all that kind of stuff. It turned into, especially like weed in high school. Man, if you didn't see me in sixth period, it's because I was smoking pot after lunch with a bunch of seniors because it was cool and I didn't want to deal with life. And then it turned into less of that, into the roller coaster and the rolling downhill of, okay, now it's pills, and now I'm just going to try everything one time because I want to see what works best and what's the most fun. To now I have a cocaine addiction and a pill addiction, and I'm trying everything one time because it's, Solomon did it. Why can't I do it? Right. But it really led down to roads of like, what am I doing with my life and why am I doing this? And I don't want to do this anymore. And a lot of it dropped off, luckily, by God's grace. But unfortunately, some of the other stuff that, I think we look at a lot of things is, it's not that bad. Like alcohol was never that bad for me, and I had levels of addiction, and I've been able to fight it for a lot of years, and now I'm over 2 months sober, never gone back. So yeah, that's kind of where I want to jump off, because alcohol has been the only thing that's been consistent, right? I started drinking when I was 14. I was 8th grade summer going into high school is where I started drinking. 36 now, 2 months sober. It's been a long road.
And I'm just going to cut you off because, again, I was joking about your addictions, but I also have known you for this many years. I've seen you go through your ups and flows and valleys, and I'm just going to stop and just say, man, how proud I am, because you, after 2 months, there's still not everyone, you haven't made it this huge proclamation in your life. You've quietly quitted. You're doing what everyone else is doing in the workforce, which is quiet quitting, but you've quiet quitted something that you've been dealing with since you were, in your low, 5th grade, 6th grade?
14, yeah.
14 years old. Okay. So you've been dealing with alcoholism for a very long time, and whether you want to say it or not, I know there was periods of time because it is your job dealing in the alcohol industry. It's like, oh no, this is just my job. You had a job to get drunk. And I didn't realize how bad it was for you until I went to that tequila tasting with you. And I don't drink that much, but we were doing tastings and you're like, oh, try this one, try this one, try this one. And about 30 minutes in, I was trashed. And you were still having conversations like you were just, this is a normal day to you. And I was just like, dude, I need to start drinking water. And where are the tacos? And where's the food trucks? Oh, this is just tequila. I'm like, no, I need food now. And I was walking around, and what I didn't realize is I was in a room with alcoholics, with people who this is what they do for a living, and not really quite realizing it, that their tolerance level was exponentially higher. And I've never had great tolerance, which is why I haven't really had like huge addictions, I think, to it, because I get drunk very quickly. And so I never needed X, Y, and Z to do that. But it's amazing to kind of see where you're at, where you have been. You're not using your alcohol as a solution any longer. And so I'm going to give you kudos. I don't do that often.
You never do that, so thanks. I
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it. Yeah, I've spent the last 20 years working in restaurant hospitality. So, there's that underlying factor of a lot of us work crazy hours. We beat ourselves up by overworking and working doubles, and it's part of the business, right? Which I hate to say that. It's part of the business of what you're in, that you're going to go out and do these things, and you get off work and you're going to do happy hours with your friends because it's the fun thing to do, and we all abuse substance in some aspect of it. But it's just one of those things that it doesn't have to be like that anymore. And I think when you look at the industry, and I put together these percentages because people always ask me like, well, how many of those people do you think are alcoholics? It's like, I'd say probably 75% of people in this industry are alcoholics, functioning alcoholics that you would have no idea that they were an alcoholic. And then there's probably another 5% to 10% that are open alcoholics, and everyone knows it. And you can see it, and those people are struggling and nobody's helping them. And then there's that other percentage, which I can't do math because I just lost track of how much percentage I was at. Like the other 5 to 10% that used to be alcoholics that don't drink anymore in this business, and that have been sober for 10, 15, 20 years. And it's the harsh reality of what this world is and what the industry is that you are kind of forced into it. And that's something that I didn't want to actually carry with me anymore of. Everybody's known me as the liquor guy. I'm going to show up with a bottle or 2 or 3, and I'm going to drink one of those myself, and the rest are for you guys. So that was something that I personally didn't want to carry with me anymore, and that's one reason why I started this process of quitting.
Well, I'm gonna kick it over to Zach, because Zach, you have not known Luke very long. So you've seen like the end of one era of his life and the beginning of him like moving on into this role with Field and Faith and driving it in this different way. And so like, I don't know if you're like, I didn't know this about Luke, or maybe you knew a little bit, but not to the extent like, oh man, maybe I shouldn't have my kids around him or something like that. But it is also an interesting thing, because I always say like, I would never want my kids around somebody who hasn't gone through life. Like I want my kids around other people who can invest in them and in situations that I can't invest in them in, because like I've never had drug addiction. I mean, I've tried marijuana a few times, never done cocaine, never done heroin, never done anything else like that. But I also had roommates that were addicted to cocaine and heroin and tried helping them through it. And again, realizing like, man, addiction is such a hard navigation to kind of pull with people, because all it takes is a little bit to get pulled back into it or drawn back into that lifestyle. And all of a sudden you're now dealing with a cycle all over and over again. But what is your experience kind of with it and Luke? And we'll start off with Luke, and then we'll go into you.
So I think, one of the things that I've always done is it's always been a coping mechanism, and it wasn't something that I realized until later in life, right? So obviously you guys know my story. My dad died when I was a kid, so I didn't have an understanding of kind of who I was. In understanding who you are and your family and understanding those dynamics, right, we could talk about the generational curse, which I would love to share kind of my story on that, of now understanding what that truly means for me. But you have these inherited traits of addiction inside of you, whether you want them or not, right? They're going to be there because it travels down in through your body and your DNA from your parents, and it's going to be there. So I didn't understand it for a long time. So it was a coping mechanism of, I was sad and depressed all the time, and I didn't want to feel this way. And anytime I got anxiety, because I have a super creative mind, and if I'm not being creative all the time, I literally, like my friends know, I'm going to spiral out, and I'm going to get pissed off, and I'm going to get annoyed. If I don't have something cool in my mind, or I'm not drawing something or designing something cool, I'm going to get annoyed, and I'm going to get frustrated, and I'm going to be like, God, why are you not doing this for me right now? This is the gift that you've given me. And I'm going to have a drink because it calms the nerves. But then that one drink turns into 2 drinks because one drink's not good enough because I've been drinking for so long. Then it turns into 3 drinks. Then I'm like, okay, I don't need any more. And then an hour goes by. Okay, well, I'm feeling anxious again, so I need another drink. So
It's
there's a lot that comes to mind with it. I mean, to answer your question, Chris, I'm very much the same way. I know that people get addicted to things, and I know that only on the other side of that have you received the tools to then help somebody, right? Like we were talking about in our last conversation, is that once you've been able to identify, oh man, I was in the bottom of this hole and I needed God's help to get out. Well, God also sends people into our lives to give us that hand up and that hand out as well. But I personally have struggled with many addictions, and we only talked about one of them as well. So I'll go ahead and put myself in the same boat as you there, Luke. I've struggled with substances as far as cannabis, cocaine, pills, alcohol. But one thing that I've known to be true, and this is just a belief that I hold, everybody's addicted to something. The question actually, and again, addiction could be considered a good thing if you're addicted to the right things. Like, for example, there are people out there who are addicted to exercise. There's a way to overdo that is dangerous. But a healthy exercise life and being addicted, quote unquote, to exercise is not a bad addiction. It's a thing that helps people do better. So I've had to stop looking at addiction itself as a bad thing, as more as to what we become addicted to that's the bad thing. So, I mean, there are a lot of people who would say Christians are addicted to Jesus. I'm addicted to learning about this guy's life and being more like him, and that drives us into a place of positive impact and change in our lives. So, I mean, when it comes down to, who my kids hang out with, of course I want to get to know them, and, kind of going back to what you were talking about, I've only known you for a couple months now, and I've just known, hey, we're going to get to know each other, and I'm going to learn things about your past. You're going to learn things about my past, and that's going to be a natural thing that happens in our relationship over time. But ultimately, I'm so thankful that one of the things I believe has been given to us as people living in the light of Jesus is some discernment. You know what I mean? Is meeting somebody and trusting that feeling of like, I can trust this guy. I know he's not perfect. I know he's struggled with things in his life, because if he's anything like me, right? If he hasn't struggled, I trust him less. I trust people who haven't struggled less, because you don't know what they're going to do when the cards are on the floor and the fan is being covered in it, right? What's going to happen? And to see somebody and to know, hey, this person has persevered over those things, that's the people I want my kids hanging out with. Because again, it's not if addiction is going to come into your life, it's when is addiction going to come into your life. Is it going to come into your life through friends, through people you know, through people you meet? You're like, I cannot believe they're struggling so badly with this. I want to help them. But all of a sudden you find yourself with a lack of tools to do it with. You're like, I know this much about it. But until you can go, hey, getting in a community, talking about it, working towards these things, learning the tools to work away from these things, is the experience that we have on the other side of being addicted to XYZ.
Yeah, the age-old saying, right? Don't trust a skinny chef, right? It's don't trust somebody if they've never dealt with anything. But I think the big thing of what you said earlier on, right, with working out, is there's a word that probably is going to be the most effective in like understanding this. It's what we allow ourselves to compromise, right? Because myself, I actually hate the feeling of being drunk. Like if you get to that point of getting the dizzying spins and whatever, I hate that feeling of when I am no longer in control, because I also have an addiction of being in control, right? Which is just something I deal with all the time. And that's why I go and like push myself and overhike and hurt myself, because I am too much in control. But I also allow that word of compromise of, well, it's okay because I can drink as much as I want, because I know my tolerance level and I can know how many drinks I can have until I don't get to that point. And I can drink all day because I won't get to that point. But I'm at the end of the day compromising my values and allowing myself to literally destroy my body from the inside out for decades, because I was allowing myself to deal with this and not actually succumb to God going, hey, this is not what I have for you. I have so much more, but you are compromising your values and your beliefs and your faith in me with your anxiety and your depression and all these hurts that you've dealt with because you think that it's okay because you don't go this much farther.
Yeah, and I think all of this kind of goes back to a story that we've said here on here before, buffalo or cow. You know, are you going to go into the storm or are you going to run from it? And I think a lot of the times with addiction, it's the shadows. It's the how can I continue to operate within the shadows, knowing that the light is still a part of it, but I don't want to step out into the light. I don't want to like expose anything that may compromise other people's opinion or false narrative about who I am. And I think really the church is really one of the only places outside of like addiction groups like AA, which even still have the God component to it, not necessarily saying like, hey, they're all about Jesus and Jesus fixing you, but there is still the higher power that they discuss. And so when people have a group of other individuals who have come alongside, and that's why I think they're so powerful, is because they have guys who have been clean for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 20 years, but they're still going to meetings because they realize that the addiction side of things is just like, hey, tomorrow I could go immediately back if I'm using the alcohol or the drugs as my solution rather than what they've replaced it with. And that replacement process takes a ton of time, takes a lot of work. And that becomes a very difficult thing for us to realize is that, hey, we actually have to be the bison. We have to be the individual that's willing to go into the storm and keep visiting the storm, realizing that it's not going to be this perfect thing because the withdrawal side effects of alcohol, you know, maybe you want to talk about that, Luke. And, you know, I don't know how far down the rabbit hole you were with cocaine and stuff like that, because I've only ever read about it in books and I've explained it over the years from psychology and how it works and how the drug system works, because I honestly believe the best way to get somebody to realize it is just to say what it is and what the facts are, and don't sugarcoat anything. Don't like, people always thought I was crazy when I would talk about drugs and be like, yeah, they're great for the very beginning. You're going to love it. You're going to feel like you're on top of the world. But guess what? Eventually, this is what happens. And then I would show like how the synapses and everything like that get overflowed, and that dopamine just gets flooded and flooded and flooded. And then you got nowhere for that happiness to go. All the things are now clogged, and your brain can no longer distinguish good from this and that. And we talked about pornography and everything like that. It's like, well, because of a drug addiction, now you can't even have sex and be happy about it because your body can't even go to that. And so now you need cocaine to even feel normal. And so what became this dragon that you're chasing, which was a high, is now I'm just chasing normality. And God says, okay, we got to get you past normality, because what we need to do is bring you back towards Him.
Normality. That's a great freaking word for being on the other side of this, because now I am realizing who I actually am as a man, as a person, as a dad, as a father, as all these things. Because it's like I've been this whole other person for the last 20 years with a boost, right, of some sort. And now I'm figuring out, okay, this is actually who I am. I can actually speak in a certain way now. I can think in a different way now. I can function in a different way because I don't need something or a crutch helping me get through the day anymore. Oh yeah, this is how I actually physically feel. That's been a new one. You know, I'm not waking up in the mornings and my kidneys hurting, but I'm waking up in the mornings and my joints hurt because it's a normal process of getting old. But I was also covering that up by drinking all the time. You know what I mean? And just kind of dealing with some of those things of the normality of it. And I don't, you know, I'm not dealing with the after effects of it as much. And I think it's by God's grace, because I've tried to quit many a times, but it always turns into the compromising aspects of, oh, I can just do one a day. I could have 2 a day. But it wasn't until I was literally like at the end of my rope, at the end of where I wanted to be physically and mentally and spiritually. This is kind of like the last lock on opening myself up and getting me to that next place with God, that He really realized of like, hey, I'm here with you. You just have to finally let go and allow for these things to happen.
Right. It's so just a brief one from me as somebody who grew up dealing with a lot of different substances and coming from a family of substance abuse. Many of my, family members have been through the programs for Alcoholics Anonymous, been through it for Narcotics Anonymous, and it's one of those things at a particular point in my life, right before the twins were gonna come around. It was about 2015. I had really gotten a concern that I was starting to fall into a habit of, because it's one of those things. If it's something you plan to do every day, so like a lot of people in their mind, they think of an alcoholic as somebody who's just always sloshed, just always drunk, right? But like you said, there's a whole lot of alcoholics out there who are functioning alcoholics that you would never know if you didn't actually witness, them seeing how frequently they drink. But my thing was, it was becoming a habit. I did it every day. And it wasn't that it was an excessive amount. It was just that it was a day-to-day thing. So when we were pregnant with the twins, so when my wife was pregnant with the twins, I wasn't pregnant with anything, but I was helping her trying to figure this out. And we had decided that year that they were going to be born, I wasn't going to drink at all. So Sober 16 is what I called it. And it was an eye-opening experience for, like you said, how other people viewed me. Because I was always the life of the party, when I showed up and they said, here's your beer, and I'm like, no, I'm good. They're like, is everything okay? And it's like, yeah, everything's fine, guys. Like, it's all right. We could still have a good time. We still can be in community with each other. But it was so interesting to see how many people thought of me in that light. But after that year, I was very thankful that I hadn't, gone through any significant withdrawal syndromes, because there are some very significant withdrawal syndromes for people who, again, are on that line of, I drink blackout drunk every day. And when you have gone that far, the withdrawal symptoms could take months before you actually feel any sort of normalcy or regularity or anything other than, maybe I just wish I could die right now instead of doing this. So I'm super thankful I never experienced any of that. But what I did do in that year was go to Vegas. And I'll tell you, there is no more eye-opening experience than being probably one of the only sober people walking through the casino and just seeing everybody else just sheets to the wind. And I'm like, this is what it looks like when everybody is doing this. And I'm just this third-party perspective of like, what is happening? So I'm thankful to say I went through that year, and since then, yes, I've had a drink every now and then, but it's certainly, I've never gotten to that place where I'm like, this really is something that could be causing a problem in my life. So I'm thankful, that I was able to do that, to see the difference between what an addiction in this aspect looks like and what, just something that's around, Now, we got a bottle of Jameson hanging out at the house because every now and then I like to have a drink. But it's certainly not something that's like, oh, every day, So that's kind of what came to my mind, is that everyday aspect of something is when you guys kind of start to look at it and say, is this controlling me or am I controlling it? Or,
all right, just so you guys can keep me on track, there's two things I wanted to address, right, with especially what you said, but right, the generational aspect of it, and I think that goes along with like the generational curse, but even more so, it's okay for people that are listening, it's okay to have a drink at home. But when you're overindulging, just remember your kids are always watching, and they are following your lead to the extreme later in life, because they don't understand what you're going through now currently and why you're doing it. And they're going to do it too, because they saw mom doing it, they saw dad doing it, they saw grandparents doing it. And then the generational curse side, right? You see this all the time in the Bible, and I never understood it until recently, and I'll share a story real quick. But like, I always knew my dad had pretty severe drinking problems, and I went back to Virginia and like learned a lot about him, about how he used to get kicked out of bars all the time and stuff, and he was just a rowdy kind of guy, and that's just who he was. My mom recently told me a story about they went to church together because his drinking was getting an issue, and some pastor was there visiting and actually spoke prophetically over him and said, there was this black cloud hovering above you, and it has to do with your alcohol abuse and your drinking. And then he began to pray over my father that if he has another drink again, that he will die from it, and scared the living crap out of him. Whoa. Now, turn back 30-something years later, last year I had 2 separate women have a vision about me saying there was a black cloud over my household that was engulfing my children and me. Now realizing that, okay, this generational curse, my father was an alcoholic, I am an alcoholic. If I don't stop this now, my children are going to face these same addictions that I have been fighting for the past 20 years, that my father faced for how many years, that my grandfather, who knows, because I didn't get to meet him or get to know him. Like, I am going to break this generational curse right here, right now, because this is what I'm supposed to do. And I think that even goes along with understanding of this addiction and your addictions, of the rituals and what goes into it. Understanding where you came from is important, right? Understanding your childhood hurt or your teenage hurt or why you're doing the things you're doing is the first part of beating an addiction. You have to understand where it starts from, right? Even if it's, okay, I'm walking to my office to go get a drink. Okay, why am I walking to my office to go get a drink right now? Like, why do I need that? Like, you have to understand from step A to step B to step C to step D of you getting to that reward or that prize of your addiction. You have to start breaking down and understanding and like looking and examining your life of, why am I doing this? Where am I going? How do I get past this?
Yeah, and that's, you know, one of the things that beginning a relationship and a walk with Jesus is the beginning of these understandings, you know, because most people will go through their lives with this black cloud over themselves or their house, and if it isn't for our beginning of understanding that, oh wait, I'm a human being, I'm in the fall, and understanding and humbling ourselves to say, no, this is a problem. It's something I have to address. I mean, obviously it's step 1 in the 12 steps is admitting that there's a problem, but the culture and the world that we live in right now, that's the last thing they want to do. This isn't a problem. Look around. Everybody else is doing it. And if it isn't for first us trying to tune into who is Jesus calling us to be, not just for our family. I mean, of course, our family is our first discipleship, and if we aren't modeling appropriate problem solving and adapting to issues, you know, and if, like you said, if they see us just jump to things are going out of hand, I'm gonna go get a drink real quick, and then we'll figure it, like that for sure is something that will keep going on. So very much like we were talking about in our last conversation with pornography and things like that, it's the very same thing. It's my kids may not see that I just run away, right? They don't know what's going on, but they just see me run away, right? And then it's like, well, I don't know why he's running away. I don't know what's going on, but that's how they learn to address problems when they start happening in their lives. So it's a hard thing to handle, because generational curses as the, you know, original idea. So dad sinned, so, you know, you have to face that. And it's like, no, that's not what they meant by that. What they meant by what you struggle with is what your kids are going to struggle with. And it doesn't mean that there's a curse on them. It means that this is what struggling with life looks like, is we're supposed to turn to the rock. We're supposed to turn to Jesus when things are getting difficult and we don't know what's going on. We turn to our understanding in him. And when we turn to something else, whether it be substances or pornography or I mean, exercise or any of it, you know, if it's an outlet of dealing with something and it's unhealthy, it's going to create generational issues in our families.
Yeah, I think that's what we're founded on, the field of faith. If boys don't learn, men won't know. You know, we have to walk it out from an early age and understand it. Otherwise, we're going to repeat the cycle of negativity in our lives, and our children's life, our grandchildren's life, and it's going to continue on and on and on. You know, I think it's one of those things too, right? You have to address your addiction first and know that you have an addiction and be aware of it before you can start understanding it. And I always say, if it's affecting your physical body, if it's affecting your mental health, or if it's affecting your spiritual walk, if it's not growing any of those things, then there's an issue with it, right? Then it's affecting you in a negative way and not helping you to be better.
All right. So with everything that's kind of been said, I'm a little bit more on this other end of this side, whereas Luke would love to point out that, I'm not addicted to drugs or anything, but like I'm addicted to not being bored. I'm addicted to, cell phones. And, if there's a lapse in anything engaging, my ADHD brain immediately goes to fill in the gap and not be bored. Because again, it's fixing what I don't want it to be, which is like nothingness. And I've had to like find ways in my life to adapt this change, to recognize like what are these avenues and how do I fix it and how do I get out of normalcy, but back to trying to enjoy life. Because I think the narrative of the world, which is with alcoholism, with addiction, is when somebody says they like you better when you're drunk, or they, man, you're a lot more fun, you're a lot more relaxed, you're a lot more whatever when it happens. Because I think, as most guys would say, like there is that joy of being in control. Drugs and alcohol don't give you the same sense of control. It allows you to loosen up, and everyone's trying to find the balance of, if I just have 1 or 2 drinks, then I loosen up a little bit, and then people like me a little bit more. And then is it the alcohol in me that they like, or do they like me? And so there's always this navigation of where do we find the lines with our addictions, and where do we find our lines with ourselves, that we truly find like the balance. But it has to come back to, I think, is where does God see me? Am I having better conversations in alcohol that are Christ related? Because I can honestly say I've had some of the best conversations with other people while sharing a whiskey or sharing an old fashioned. And, before we did this podcast, we were going to do another one called Christ Over Cocktails, right? And the whole idea was to do this. And then when he started having these realizations like, hey, we can't really do that, maybe it would be like Christ Over Mocktails. Because we didn't want to influence like the culture of alcohol, but we really wanted to influence the discussions about Christ. And so there are avenues to where it's just like, hey, do I meet somebody? Do I, level the playing field? Do I open myself up in these different ways? And all of this is a very difficult navigation. And I think it goes back to is 1, what is the Holy Spirit talking to you about these situations? 2, have you prayed about these situations? Have you opened yourself up to God being able to work in you? Because if you're not opening yourself up to God being able to work in you, then the door is closed and the devil is the one who's speaking to you the loudest. And you're in a room that is basically a sounding gong. And so that's just my encouragement on this. And I'm going to leave it with that.
All right, I'm going to close it out because there's actually one thing I want to say, because even talking about our last conversation, I think the overwhelming thing that keeps coming in my mind and my heart right now is that us, especially as men, is we are constantly looking for this level of acceptance. And if we don't get this acceptance, that's where we kind of feed into these other things of, well, yeah, people like me because I'm drinking, or, these women online like me because, well, they don't know me. But I can find and feel attracted and wanted and desired. We're constantly looking for this level of acceptance and want and need. And that's why we fall into these traps and these preys of substance and other things. So let's get down to our hunting, fishing story. Chris, do you want to share about your first big game kill? I think that was kind of a big deal this last couple weeks.
Yeah. Okay.
You became a man. It was really exciting.
Yeah. Well, this is the first time I had ever been drawn for a big game. And I will genuinely say I don't like just sitting there. I hate boredom. And from quail hunting, where it is the perfect ADHD thing on the planet, because I'm just all over the place. And then you can hear the quail, and then I turn into like Call of Duty mode, and I get to like do my fantasy of holding a big shotgun in my hand and going after it, versus turkey, which was, hey, I just spent $370 on camouflage. And then I just watched Red Dawn. I was like, you're telling me I could have just worn whatever and just stuck some needles on me and probably done the exact same thing and saved myself a bunch of money. But it was waking up early and just sitting out there and waiting like at this water hole. But luckily, Luke was praying for me to get something and I was praying for him to get something, because like I was like genuinely nervous. Just because of all the stories and everything like that. And like, oh, they're a lot harder to kill. Like, I love quail. You shoot them, they kind of do the thing. You go pick them up and it's all over. But yeah, the one that I shot, I kind of felt bad because it was legit smoking, because I had shot it really good and it was just on the ground and like kind of going over it. Like, quail, you don't see their eyes, but like with the turkey, like you saw the eyes. But it's kind of like a cool thing now. I mean, after cleaning it and doing what we've always done with birds and animals, is like now this is a meal for a lot more people in my life. But the sitting around and waiting, it tested myself in a way that was a little bit different, because it was just boring. I would have rather just been in the woods trying to find them.
Which was fun too, because right, you got to hide out in the middle of the night by yourself. Which too, we checked out this water tank the day prior, and there was mountain lion tracks, fresh mountain lion tracks everywhere. So there's a level of fear and anxiety that comes along with that, which I was like, he's by himself across the way.
Yes, and then he had other people with him, and I was by myself. But you put me in the position where we saw more tracks, and I was just like, I didn't want this. But yeah, ended up getting turkey.
Yeah, so now you provided Thanksgiving dinner for everybody.
I did. Gobble, gobble. Boom! It's my hat that Luke got me for my birthday. He got me a hat that says gobble, 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 boom. So, yeah.
Because I wanted him to look redneck while he was working in California teaching kids.
Exactly. Because I was allowed to wear a hat. And so I would wear that hat backwards, and it has like desert camo on it and stuff like that. Yeah. It's pretty cool. Pretty enjoyable. But yeah, thank you guys so much for enjoying the talk with us today, man. If you want to reach out, need somebody to pray with you on different things, we also have a group of guys that end up meeting if you're in the Phoenix area called ISI. A lot of those guys have dealt with and are currently dealing with addiction. Shout out to our buddy Chad, who just celebrated his 1 year being clean. So super excited for Chad and what he's been able to accomplish over the past year. You know, he's got a mentor who's also in our group. His name is Rich. Just an amazing dude who, again, you need people in your life that are influencing and pushing you in different directions, because, you know, being around the wrong crowd can pull you away from it. So if you need something like that, highly recommend getting involved in men's groups that are pushing men closer towards Christ and lifting each other up in ways that we can't lift ourselves in many capacities. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode. Like, comment, share, post it on social media. It's a quick little button on whatever avenue you are listening to this on, and click and share it, man, because we're just getting started, and hopefully someone else can listen in on these from their drive to work and impact their lives. And you never know the depths of which it can change somebody's course of their life.
Keep sharing. We're not alone. Don't let other guys be alone. See you guys next time.